End of the post-war consensus. Heath's governance.
I'm A.
And I'm M. Heath as a leader. In 1970, the Conservative Party won the general election and Heath became PM. When Edward Heath became PM, he had a clear and detailed programme of policies for the modernisation of Britain. He had already been leader of opposition for 5 years, longer than any Conservative leader since the war, apart from Churchill.
He was state school educated. He came from a different social background from the old Etonians who had previously dominated the Conservatives. He was the first Conservative Party leader to have been elected to the leadership of a Conservative Party and had been educated at state schools. Task: what were the old Etonians also known as? Think about the angry young men.
He was seen as stiff and prickly in dealing with people. He was regarded as too honest for his own good and not skillful enough in pleasing political allies, unlike Wilson. Unlike Wilson, he was not seen as devious or interested in plots and intrigue.
He was good at policies but not politics. He seemed well prepared for government, having developed detailed policies, for example, for industrial issues, economic modernisation, and he knew the issues surrounding the EEC well. He was the chief negotiator for entry to the EEC in 1961 to 1963. Task: write down everything you can remember about the EEC.
Heath was defeated by Thatcher in 1973, after which Heath's reputation took a battering from supporters of Thatcherism. However, after the economic and industrial problems of the period 1970 to 1974 and the election defeats of 1974, several backbench MPs were determined to force a leadership contest. Margaret Thatcher emerged as the key challenger. Her policies were generally to the right of Heath and Macmillan, and she had become sympathetic to monetarist and free market policies put forward by Enoch Powell and Keith Joseph.
Political and economic policies. What did the Conservatives promise in the 1970 election? Tax reform, which appealed to workers and businesses, better law and order, which combated young people, riots, drugs, reforms to trade unions, immigration controls as a result of Enoch Powell, cuts to public spending, for example healthcare and education, the end to subsidising falling industries, for example miners and steelworks. Political and economic policies. In the January 1970 election, the Conservatives held a conference at Selsdon Park to approve a policy programme which would form the basis of the Conservative Party's manifesto at the election. Task: mind map all you can remember from the 60s on why the Conservatives may have done this.
At this point, the post-war consensus was breaking down due to continuous economic problems, uncooperative trade unions, labour divisions, social problems and continuous poverty. This caused the Conservatives to consider changes that they would act upon after they won. However, he still believed in one-nation Toryism and the post-war consensus. The Selsdon Park programme was not intended to be an all-out rejection of post-war consensus politics. Task: list all the post-war consensus aims.
What were Labour's strengths for the election? Roy Jenkins confirmed economic and financial stability. Wilson had got Labour through hard times and he was a master campaigner and more experienced than Heath. However, Labour's position in the 1970s was quite fragile, and Wilson's government had suffered a series of major setbacks.
So why might have the Conservatives won? Powell's Rivers of Blood speech had got more votes for the Conservatives, and Heath's dismissal of Powell made him appear more strong and principled. Task: why was Enoch Powell's speech so controversial?
What did the Conservatives have to deal with? 1. Lame duck industries, an industry unable to compete to survive without state support. Decimalisation. 2. A new currency with 100 pence, bringing currencies in line with Europe. 3. Stagflation, unusual combination of inflation and stagnant economic growth. 4. U-turn, a reversal of previous policies. And 5. OPEC, the Organisation of Petroleum Exporting Countries.
Successes of Heath's government. The British currency went decimal, bringing it in line with European economies in 1971. The school leaving age was raised to 16. By 1973, unemployment had fallen to 500,000. The local government was reorganised to make it more efficient. Rolls-Royce was nationalised in 1971, and money was poured into Upper Clyde ship builders to prevent them going bankrupt, which was not a good use of money. But by 1973, the investment the government had made into modernising industry seemed to be working. Decimalisation, which had been agreed in 1965 but came into force in 1971, the new British currency would have 100 new pence rather than 144 old pennies in the pound, bringing it more in line with the currencies of other European countries.
As unemployment started to edge towards 1 million, the government, wanting to reduce state intervention in industry, felt compelled to take action. The prestigious engineering firm Rolls-Royce was nationalised in 1971, and government money was poured in to prevent Upper Clyde shipbuilders going bankrupt. This was the famous U-turn. U-turn, a reversal of previous policy. Edward Heath's U-turn in 1971 to 1972 was his retreat from the free enterprise economic principles his government had tried to follow from 1970.
Failures of Heath's government. Unemployment rose to 1 million in the mid-70s. Stagflation. Chancellor Anthony Barber introduced cuts to public spending. Barber introduced tax cuts to encourage investment. However, the Barber boom began with rapid rise in inflation. The Yom Kippur War in the Middle East promoted OPEC to declare an oil embargo. Exports stopped and the price of oil rocketed to 4 times the usual level. Long queues formed outside petrol stations. This was context for the National Union of Miners to demand a huge new pay rise in November 1973. The stage was set for a dramatic struggle between the National Union of Miners and the government. OPEC, Organisation of Petroleum Exporting Countries, led by Saudi Arabia, this aimed to protect the interests of its members. OPEC agreed to fixed levels of production to prevent prices from falling too low.
The new Chancellor, Anthony Barber, initially introduced cuts to public spending. He also introduced tax cuts to try and encourage investment. What was called the Barber boom began, with rapid rise in inflation. However, inflation was not accompanied by economic growth. Unemployment actually went up, something that was highly unusual at the same time as inflation. This led to a new word, stagflation. Stagflation, a word invented by economists to describe the unusual combination of inflation and stagnant economic growth, which often produces unemployment, occurring at the same time.
Industrial disputes, 1970 to 1974, and the miners' strike. Industrial Relations Act 1971. It was very similar to Barbara Castle's In Place of Strife. The Act set up an industrial relations court and provided for strike ballots and a calling-off period before official strikes could begin. It didn't work and the TUC and CBI opposed it. It led to major strikes in 1972. Around 24 million days were lost to strike action, more than in 1926. Why was it introduced in the first place? Industrial strikes from dockers and a large pay settlement for dustmen, a postal workers' strike and go slow by power workers, which led to power cuts. Heath also abolished the National Board for Prices and Incomes. Task: write down all you can remember about Barbara Castle and her In Place of Strife.
Industry Act 1972. It aimed to involve the TUC and CBI and government in agreeing on wages. This policy was criticised by the right. Why was it introduced? In an attempt to reach or manage wage demands. However, further industrial disputes in November 1973 and the oil crisis increased another wage demand which was beyond the limits of inflation. Miners introduced an overtime ban to strengthen demands. Heath hoped for a compromise. Strikes in 1972 by the miners, ambulance drivers, firefighters, civil servants, power workers, hospital strikes and engine drivers.
Closer look. The miners' strike started on the 9th of January 1972 at a time of harsh winter weather. The use of flying pickets, particularly the Yorkshire miners led by Arthur Scargill, virtually stopped the movement of the coal around the country. By the 9th of February, the government declared a state of emergency. Its schools were closed and 1.2 million workers were laid off. It set up the Wilberforce Committee to examine the miners' demand, and announce a 3-day working week to save electricity. The Wilberforce Committee came down on the side of the miners, and the NUM leader, Joe Gormley, was able to negotiate a generous wage settlement.
3-day week, 1974. Heath moved Whitelaw from Northern Ireland office to be the Minister of Employment. However, this failed. The miners refused to accept the pay offer and the government refused to treat the miners as a special case. So, in January 1974, the NUM called a national strike. To conserve electricity in response to the wave of industrial action and an energy crisis, the 3-day week was imposed. For example, engineers, dockers, firefighters and coal miners all went on strike.
What did this crisis lead to? A balance of payments crisis. In the general election of 1974, which led to a hung parliament, no party had overall majority. This triggered a year of political crisis. The 3-day strike was imposed by the Heath government to conserve electricity in response to a wave of industrial action by engineers, dockers and firefighters, and the looming threat of a national coal strike in the middle of an energy crisis. Closer look. During the 3-day week, fuel was rationed and a speed limit of 50 miles per hour was imposed on all roads. Deep cuts were made to the heating and lighting of public buildings, and TV closed down at 10:30 p.m. Many industries were forced to lay off workers, and there was a huge surge in the number of people signing up for temporary unemployment payments. Other workers found they did long shifts on the days when they were in work to make up for their hours. The impact of this is difficult to measure, but neither productivity nor wages declined by very much. The shortage of coal, together with rising oil prices, led to a balance of payments.
Northern Ireland, the Troubles and Sunningdale. In 1970, there was an explosion of sectarian violence in Northern Ireland. The British Army struggled to keep peace and the political situation in Belfast was close to breakdown. Paramilitary organisations began to crop up.
IRA, Irish Republican Army, split between official IRA and provisional in 1970, Republican. INLA, Irish National Liberation Army, formed out of official IRA in 1974, Republican. UDA, Ulster Defence Force, Loyalist. UVF, Ulster Volunteer Force, Loyalist.
Edward Heath's government made strenuous attempts to find a political solution. Since 1912, the Ulster Unionists had always been part of a Conservative and Unionist party and had tended to support them. At first, Heath backed Brian Faulkner, the UUP Ulster Unionist Party leader who led the Belfast government, going along with the policies of imposing nighttime curfews and the introduction of internment in 1971. So, the introduction of nighttime curfews and internment in 1971. They were ineffective as security measures and alienated the nationalist communities. 95% of those interned between 1971 to 75 were Catholics. McVeigh, IRA commander, stated internment was among the best recruitment tools the IRA had ever had.
What did these measures mean? The British Army was regarded as the enemy, occupying power by Catholics and nationalists. A march of protest was organised on the 30th of January 1972 by the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association. This resulted in Bloody Sunday, British soldiers firing live ammunition in an attempt to control the march. This led to 26 unarmed civilians shot and 13 killed.
Following Bloody Sunday, the British Embassy in Dublin was burned down, support for the IRA grew, and it raised a lot of funds from the USA. In 1972 became the bloodiest year of the Troubles, with 1,382 explosions, 10,628 shooting incidents, and 480 people killed. Heath suspended Stormont Parliament in March 1972 and brought in direct rule from Westminster, appointing Willie Whitelaw as Secretary of State. Ireland would be ruled from London rather than having its own separate parliament.
Heath's policy: defeat the IRA and look for permanent political solution, ensure peace. This led to a negotiation with Northern Irish political parties.
Northern Ireland political parties: Unionist and Loyalist, UUP, DUP, Alliance; Nationalist and Republican, SDLP and Sinn Féin. Martin McGuinness was a member of the Provisional IRA in the early 1970s, although he claims to have left the organisation in 1974. He was elected as an MP for Sinn Féin in 1997, although like all Sinn Féin members, he did not take his seat. He was Sinn Féin's chief negotiator at the talks that led to the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. He later became Deputy First Minister in the devolved Northern Irish Assembly after 2007.
1973, the Sunningdale Agreement. Sunningdale Agreement was a complex plan for a power-sharing government with the support of the SDLP and the Alliance and leadership of UUP. Both Nationalists and Unionists would have representation. New Northern Ireland Assembly under proportional representation. Council of Ireland, input from Republic. The Sunningdale Agreement was named after the hotel in Berkshire where the negotiations took place.
Results of Sunningdale. Extremists denounce it. The UUP voted to pull out in January 1974. Harry West became UUP leader and opposed the agreement. Prospects of settlement undermined by problems in mainland Britain, the miners' strikes and the election. The Conservative Party could not rely on the UUP, therefore preventing Conservatives from continuing in government. Wilson becomes Prime Minister. Those parties opposed to Sunningdale put up a single candidate in each constituency in Northern Ireland. In contrast, the pro-Sunningdale votes were split. 11 of the 12 constituencies returned candidates that opposed the agreement. Moreover, concern about rely on the support of the UUP, as might have been expected, preventing the Conservatives from continuing in government.
A selection of events from the Troubles in 1970 to 1974. March 1971, 3 British soldiers were killed, Provisional IRA thought to be responsible. 4,000 shipyard workers marched to demand internment for IRA leaders. August 1971, 300 people interned. December 1971, McGurk's Bar, 15 killed by UVF bomb. January 1972, Bloody Sunday, 13 killed by British Army. February 1972, Aldershot Barracks in England, 7 killed by IRA bomb. December 1972, Irish Parliament in Dublin, 2 killed by Loyalist bomb. December 1973, Sunningdale Conference. February 1974, M62 Army coach, 12 killed by RAA bomb.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.